Good morning everybody, and welcome to this video, which is part of my series about how to write in an academic style. And this series is designed for students of A-level English literature, but of course it could be applicable to a whole range of different subjects, and also if you're studying English at university as well, or for GCSE I suppose too. So today we're going to look at how to craft an introduction to an essay, and I've got some different excellence criteria here. So first of all, you need to contextualise your answer, you need to respond to the question, you need to conceptualise your response, and you need to use precise vocabulary as well. So in terms of contextualising, by that I mean you need to give us a little bit of information about the text, not too much because the person who's reading the essay will probably have read the original text, but enough to tell us where you're coming from. Obviously you need to respond directly to the question, and I think that although this seems like quite a straightforward thing to do, sometimes this is something that students forget to do and they lose that focus on the point of the question. In terms of conceptualising, I'm going to do a separate video on this, but what I mean is looking at the big ideas of the text. You could ask yourself, what is the message that the writer wants to get across? What are they saying about society? Maybe about the role of women in society, perhaps about power structures, about ideas of kingship or leadership. It could be to do with power structures in terms of, if you were taking a Marxist approach, in terms of kind of which class has more power than the other class, how do the working class respond to that. It could be, if you were looking at a post-colonial approach, power structures in terms of race. So is there a social hierarchy which is partly dependent on the race of the characters? But basically ask yourself, what message is the writer communicating? What is the big idea that they want me to take away from this text? And of course, as always, you need to be using really precise vocabulary. So I'm going to model a couple of different ways to do this. So my first question here is about Macbeth, and I've chosen this. I choose Macbeth a lot of times in these videos because so many people are familiar with the text or have maybe studied it or are studying it as part of one of their courses. So the question is, in Act 1, Scene 5, to what extent is Lady Macbeth a powerful character? So the first thing I need to do is to contextualise, and I'm going to contextualise this scene in the play. So in the exposition, and the exposition is of course the first section of a tragedy where the writer is explaining the roles of the different characters and setting out the power dynamics. So in the exposition of Macbeth, Lady Macbeth is primarily portrayed as dominant and powerful. So what I've done there is I've started to contextualise the scene by saying that it's from the exposition of Macbeth. I'm responding directly to the question because I'm saying yes, she is dominant and she is powerful. And then I need to conceptualise. So I mean, I'm doing this as a very kind of paint by numbers way, but hopefully it'll show you the different elements you need to include. So Shakespeare does this in order to question the traditional stereotypes of femininity and to highlight the idea that women want and can achieve power just as much as men. Okay, so what I'm doing there is I'm kind of using the text as an example of a much bigger social phenomenon. So the text is a very small representation of how stereotypes of femininity are not always valid. They don't always work because Lady Macbeth is not a stereotypical feminine woman. Now, this is quite a straightforward point, and I would expect my GCSE students to be able to say this. So if I wanted to make it a little bit more complicated, I might start to ask questions about these big ideas. So, and you could pose it as a question in the text. So we could say, does Shakespeare... I'm going to say actually, however, does Shakespeare suggest that women can only achieve power through different means to men? I haven't phrased that particularly well, so I've not really got my precise vocabulary there. So if we go back and edit this a little bit, so I've said, however, does Shakespeare suggest that women can only achieve power through different means to men? Can women only achieve power through manipulation rather than physical dominance? Okay, so we're starting to posit a question there, which complicates the question a little bit more. And in terms of precise vocabulary, well, we're talking about dominance here, we're talking about stereotypes of femininity and so on. I mean, it could be more complicated, but as a starting point, it's not bad. Okay, so let's move on to the second example that we've got here. I'll just move my book around a little bit so that you can see. Okay, so the second example is, Iago is characterised by motiveless malignity. To what extent do you agree? And this is an example that's taken from Othello, which is another play by Shakespeare, which I study with my A-level classes. And Iago as a character is a little bit like Lady Macbeth, is very manipulative. He deliberately, I suppose differently to Lady Macbeth, he deliberately tries to cause a tragic hero's downfall, whereas in Macbeth, Lady Macbeth is trying to manipulate Macbeth in order to cause his rise to power, I suppose. So to what extent do you agree is a different question, Sam, to what we've had before. So we need a slightly different response to that. But if we go back to our excellence criteria, the first thing I need to do is to contextualise my introduction. So Iago, so I'm going to put the embodiment of tragic villainy. Iago is arguably the most dominant character in the play, seizing the limelight from the eponymous hero Othello. Okay, so rather than contextualising it in terms of the place in the play, because this isn't an extract-based question, it's a character-based question, I'm contextualising the character within the framework of tragedy here. So the embodiment of tragic villainy, Iago, is arguably the most dominant character in the play, seizing the limelight from the eponymous hero Othello. And eponymous means the character who's named in the title of the play. So Macbeth is the eponymous hero of that play. Romeo and Juliet are the eponymous heroes of that other tragedy. So I've contextualised. Now I need to make sure that I respond directly to the question. So motiveless malignity is the phrase that we're looking at here, and malignity means evil, malevolence. One could, I've already used argue, so I don't want to do that again. One could posit, love that word, one could posit that Iago is purely evil without cause. So I'm not necessarily using the direct wording of the question, but I'm using synonyms for it, so I'm clearly referring back to the question. So one could posit that Iago is purely evil without cause. I'm going to change that slightly and put although in there. Let's reread that. Does that make sense? Although one could posit that Iago is purely evil without cause, it could also be argued that his malign actions stem from a fear of the other. Okay, so I'm drawing on post-colonial there, and I might put in here racist as well, just to make that a little bit stronger. So stem from a fear of the other. So I've responded directly to the question, but in doing so I've also suggested two possible lines of argument there. So if you look at this sentence and break it in half, the first part of the sentence I'm saying although one could posit that Iago is purely evil without cause, so that is suggesting that Iago is motiveless. He doesn't have any reason for his actions in the play. But then I'm using my connective phrase here, although it could also be argued that his malign and racist actions stem from a fear of the other. So what I'm doing there is suggesting two different lines of argument that I might be pursuing in this essay. I'm not giving an answer to that yet because this is only the introduction. The purpose of your intro is to set up the arguments that you're going to look at later on. So in the body of my essay, in my paragraphs, my analytical paragraphs, I'll explore these different ideas, I'll build up the evidence for those ideas, and then in my conclusion I'll say which of those two lines of argument I'm going to go with. Okay, so looking back at our success criteria then, we need to conceptualise would be the next idea. So I've already kind of hinted at that in my references to Iago's racism and to his fear of the other. So let's put by presenting Iago in this way, Shakespeare criticises the racism of Renaissance society. Okay, there's lots of different kind of arguments you could make about that, but just to keep it straightforward, we'll have that phrase and we can tick off the conceptualising. Then the last bullet point in my excellence criteria is to look at precise vocabulary. So if we have a little check of that here, I'll get a different colour of highlighter. We've got Iago as the embodiment of tragic villainy. We've got the idea of him being dominant, the eponymous tragic hero, his fear of the other, Renaissance society. So not always the most complicated words, but these are the right words for the context that we're looking at. So I hope that's helpful for you, and if you remember to use this checklist as you're writing your introductions, contextualise, respond, conceptualise, and then use your precise vocabulary.